Hello, I'm Dr. Scott Watier.
And I'm Tommy Welling, and you're listening to the Fasting for Life podcast.
This podcast is about using fasting as a tool to regain your health, achieve ultimate wellness, and live the life you truly deserve.
Each episode is a short conversation on a single topic with immediate actionable steps. We cover everything from fat loss and health and wellness to the science of lifestyle design.
We started Fasting for Life because of how fasting has transformed our lives, and we hope to share the tools that we have learned along the way. Hey everyone, welcome to the Fasting for Life podcast. My name is Dr. Scott Watier, and I'm here as always with my good friend and colleague Tommy Welling. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Hey Scott, how are you?
Fantastic, my friend. Excited for today's conversation. We are going to go back in the time machine with Dr. Jason Fung and talk about a Fasting for Life application to a recent article that he wrote on leptin's role in obesity. And it's the story of how the hormone leptin went from the cure for obesity to an afterthought. And we're going to apply it in a Fasting for Life way. We're going to give you some action steps and talk through what it looks like and why leptin's important. Last week's episode was on insulin sensitivity. So if you are new to the podcast, you're diving right into the deep end. We're going to be pulling out some research articles, but what we'll do in typical Fasting for Life fashion is we will distill it down into some action steps that you can take based off of today's conversation. So if you're new, welcome in. If you want to hear more about our story and how fasting has transformed our lives, head back to episode 1, give it a listen. If you're a long-term listener, or like we like to call a fasting OG, or part of the Fasting for Life lifestyle or the family that you've been following us for a while, we appreciate you continuing to listen and allowing us to be part of your fasting journey. So Tommy,
sir,
back in the day, back in the time machine, I was standing in your kitchen in 2019.
I remember.
It was Father's Day.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, man, what are you doing? You look good. As we were circling and doing our gratuitous grazing of the island of whatever food, Mexican food or whatever it was that we had gotten. And like, yeah, I'm doing some fasting. I'm like, cool. Yeah, me too. Without success, because I was doing keto and IF, like 16-8 windows. Mm-hmm. And lost 10 or 12 pounds, and just kind of got stuck and plateaued and frustrated and fat bombed my way back out of it.
Sure.
If you don't know what that is, that's the high fat content of the keto diet, which we believe is a great tool for reversing metabolic disease and syndrome and blood sugar issues like diabetes.
Yeah.
But for us, or for our personal experience, a lot of people that we've worked with or coached, is not a long-term solution. But I asked you, I said, so man, you look great. What are you doing? You said, well, I'm fasting. I said, okay. Well, if I was to walk into your clinic, right? Let's say you're in practice and you tell me what would you tell me to do? And you'd be like, well, stop eating. I'm like, okay, I get it. But then what? So you referenced the obesity code by Dr. Fung, and I immediately ordered it on Amazon and downloaded it, read it from cover to cover that next night, and then birthed the Fasting for Life movement, the Fasting for Life podcast, the Fasting for Life challenges, the coaching, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
So we are going back to, I like to say, the source for my experience of getting into a fasting lifestyle, because you had started about 6 months before me. Mm-hmm. And that book was kind of the starting point. And from there, it's just kind of taken on a life of its own, right?
Yeah, it sure was. Because there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle, but when you come to fasting or any weight loss or health regaining method, there's usually some attempts from the past, like maybe some diet baggage or maybe some failed attempts, things like that. And I had dozens and dozens and dozens of attempts over the years for myself, where the weight just kept ticking up. And so to dive into Dr. Fung's book and start to put the pieces in the right order that made sense for a lot of the idiosyncrasies and a lot of the little things that I didn't quite understand, or why a certain method would only work for a small amount of time and then stop.
Right.
But there weren't clear answers for a lot of those questions, and a lot of those things were answered, from the obesity code. So there was an understanding there that I was able to, start taking action with, and that was kind of that was where the process really started for me.
Yeah, and the application, the action component, is something that you and I have focused on since day one, since we first recorded episode 1. Going into pre-production and okay, what are we going to do? Well, let's just share our story, because it transformed our lives. Okay, there's people to help. Let's go figure this out. Let's go do something. Right. So
Yeah.
the obesity code left me wanting more in terms of action, like an action plan.
Yes.
It gave me the big picture. And that's what you'd been working on for the 6 months. And then, over the course of the, next 50 to 60 days, lost a ton of weight, gained some of it back, lost it again, gained it back, lost it again, gained it back, lost it again. And every time I gained and regained and lost, I would regain a little bit less as I was adopting the lifestyle, as my habits were starting to change, as my identity was shifting from the eat less, move more, keto, intermittent fasting into more of a fasting lifestyle, right? So I want to talk, last week we talked about the insulin equation, and we focus really on ways to stimulate insulin sensitivity rather than focusing on the insulin resistance, which is what we talk about a lot, which is undermining your weight loss efforts. And we believe is a big part of the carb insulin model of obesity, which is 75% of the population is either overweight or obese. At any given time, 60 to 75 out of 6 people can lose the weight, but then the research clearly shows at that 2 to 3 year mark that 95% of the people put it back on. And a lot of people come to fasting for weight loss, but it's way more than that. For us specifically, reversing prediabetes and COPD and asthma and labs and all of the crazy, incredible testimonies that we've seen since then. My dad no longer is a type 2 diabetic after 30 years off of 15 medications, et cetera, et cetera.
Wow.
There's a lot of off ramps somewhere in between of like, okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to manage this? And that's what this podcast is about, is to give you little tips and tricks and things that you can do. So when we look at big picture and talking about insulin sensitivity last week, this week we're going to shift. I don't know if I tried to say shuttle or what I was trying to say there, to one of the other components of the equation, right? Fasting is the simple part, especially if you get decent at it and you start feeling the euphoria of it and you're like, ooh, it's just easier to fast. Okay, well,
sure.
There's also a nutrition food component, which is the other half of the equation, right? And when we talk about that,
not to be glossed over either.
Yes. Not to be like, just open your window up, fill it with stuff, and then go back to fasting, right? So that can work short term. I've done it.
Yeah, sure.
But we want to look at big picture leptin, because we talk about hunger hormones, we talk about satiety, we talk about building that confident relationship around food, getting rid of the good, bad labels, right? So when we look at the body, we're going to look at how the energy is stored in terms of you eat food, it breaks down into calories. And then you've got glucose, right? So you got 2 forms of energy that the body is going to either use or store, right? We've got glucose and then we've got fat. So glucose is then stored in the liver as glycogen. Once that's full, then the body turns it into fat, right? Which is de novo lipogenesis, the new formation of new fat. And then the body can also use the 2 main forms of stored energy when food is not available. So it can tap into those glucose glycogen stores and it can tap into fat. So we talk a lot about insulin as being the light switch in between that process. And it's not black or white, on or off, but it's usually an ebb and flow of where your body is in terms of storing or burning energy. We want that equation to tilt towards the side of burning energy, right?
Yep.
If we are in a chronic insulinogenic state and we have poor insulin sensitivity, then we are going to have a much harder time to tap into those fat stores, even in a caloric deficit. And no, we are not breaking the laws of thermodynamics. We are simply stating that there are lots of things that are going to affect your satiety, your hunger hormones, and AKA your body's or your body fat thermostat. So you've got hormones on the left side that are going to raise and hormones on the right side that are going to lower. So just picture the thermostat in the hotel and you get in. The first thing you do if you go to Disney is you just click it as far down as you can to get the room as cold as you can. So when you come back, it's nice and cold. And then they have these things that automatically turn them up and you're like, no, I want it cold. So you hit it back then. Then you've looked at these TikToks and there's things you can do to hack it and get it to go down lower, and you can call maintenance and they can come up and turn it down a little bit. Right. But we want to lower our body fat thermostat. So we've got hormones that raise our set weight and hormones that lower our set weight. And this is called set point theory. And on each of those equations, you've got things like insulin, cortisol, and sex hormones, right? Testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, all those things that the adrenals make on the left side that raise the body's set weight. And then you've got all these things on the right side that lower your body's set weight. GLP-1, Ozempics, Wegovy's. These are things that are GLP-1 agonists, right? That they're going to um, decrease your hunger and allow your body to tap into those fat stores. We talked about that on the insulin sensitivity, and we'll talk about some foods that can also have a natural effect like that as well.
Yeah.
But on this set weight lowering side of the body fat thermostat, we have leptin. And leptin is a major player in this satiety, hunger equation of breaking your fast intentionally with good, nutritious food choices.
Yeah. I wanted to highlight one thing that you mentioned, which was those energy storage buckets. And so when you're talking about actually, we have glucose and glycogen storage, which is roughly about a day's worth of fuel. And then we have the fat storage buckets, which are essentially unlimited, at least over time. They'll fill up at a certain rate, and you could find yourself at a higher weight set point, like you're talking about. And then it may be a while before they start to fill up again. But essentially, they can divide, they can replicate, and they can grow bigger. So we can end up with more fat cells, and they can fill up to a larger size as well. And so the thing I wanted to highlight here for the balance is that when we're filling up those buckets, it's your glycogen stores can be filled up in less than a day's worth of eating. Okay. So just one larger indulgent meal, and maybe you need a second one, or maybe not. Depends on how many calories actually come in during that meal and your activity level. But definitely by a second meal, if there's not enough time in between those, you can find yourself with 100% full glycogen stores, okay, in a matter of hours. Okay. And then any fuel that comes in after that has to get shuttled to long-term fat. There's no physical ability to store more glycogen in the body once the liver's full and the skeletal muscle is full. And this is a problem because in a matter of hours or just thinking about it as one or two meals, we can start to store long-term fat stores. The trouble is that we're not going to be able to tap back into those long-term fat stores until we're fully glycogen depleted, which means we've gone through all of those stores. So we've put enough time in between our meals to actually burn through the glycogen stores so we can go back to tapping into some long-term fat. So pretty quick to start pouring some fuel into them, but a lot longer and more deliberate intention needed to actually tap back into them.
And I use the thermostat analogy in the hotel room, right? Because it can never be cold enough. We live in Houston. It's, already 100 degrees like this. It's like summer's here and it's June 4th or whatever day it is. It started in May. So we're like, okay, great. So you can never get it cold enough. So what'll happen with leptin is it's going to have the same potential to have a resistant effect like insulin resistance. So we're not talking about clinically diagnosed insulin resistance or leptin resistance, but what we're supposed to do is we eat, insulin goes up, which tells our body to store fat. If this were the whole story, then the thermostat would just continually increase until we weighed 800 pounds. But luckily, we have hormones like leptin that go in the opposite direction. The problem is leptin is produced by fat cells, and it's proportional to the body mass and nutritional status. So as our fat cells increase, Tommy, you were just talking about that process, right?
Yeah.
Then you produce more leptin. Leptin production increases with increased fat cells. It's a metabolically active tissue. So we'll come back to this cart before the horse, don't lose weight too fast, right? Kind of conversation. But the increased leptin tells the brain specifically to say we're full, and it will decrease your appetite. So it will, it'll tell you, okay, I'm good. We're good. I'm okay. But if you increase body fat too much over time, it's going to cross the blood-brain barrier. And those signals that normally reduce your appetite are no longer going to be received, or you in the hotel hitting the down button to get it cold. Obviously, it's the inverse of what I'm using here because we're saying that the thermostat is going up in terms of weight.
But the button's not doing anything.
The button's not doing anything.
Yeah.
So there was a ton of research back in the 1990s where they were trying to find a leptin, synthetic leptin that was going to be able to kind of cure the obesity epidemic, right? Okay.
Yeah. If it was the opposite of insulin, if it was the opposite of storing fat, then this should help, right?
It should absolutely help, right? So what happened was, though, that the state of obesity, right, is a leptin resistant state. So there's plenty of leptin, but it's not having the desired effect of reducing the body weight, either at the fat cells in number and or size. So what happens is, this is when we talk about area under the curve, or the effects of, or the relationship between insulin and leptin in terms of hunger and our metabolic efficiency, or our body's ability to burn energy. So leptin communicates with your hypothalamus in the brain to regulate your hunger. Just as with insulin, leptin become resistance. The more fat you have, the more leptin you have, right? But the signals aren't being received. Just think of like the want in the Peanuts, like, or is that the Muppets back in the day?
I think it was both. Yeah,
probably both. So the interplay between insulin and leptin. So high insulin levels can interfere with leptin, contributing to the resistance. Diets high in carbohydrates, specifically refined processed sugars, foods, drinking your calories, all of those places, right?
Ones that have super high insulin spikes resulting from them.
Correct. And or then eating consistently or snacking consistently throughout the day, you're going to be keeping your insulin elevated, not clinically diagnosable. We're not talking about pathology here, right, on a lab report, but you're having elevated insulin throughout the day, which is going to negate the ability of your body to burn fat. It's going to store more. The more fat you have, the more leptin you have, and boom, which came first?
Yeah.
The chicken or the egg. And this was a diabetes article from the Journal of Diabetes Care in 2008. Insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia, elevated insulin. Is hyperinsulinemia the cart or the horse?
It's a great question.
The reality is it's both a result and a driver of insulin resistance, and the same application can be applied to leptin.
Yeah. That's what we call a positive feedback loop. And that's a problem because when we're talking about the state of obesity and an obesogenic state, and then furthering that problem, that state of the body, that means that the more fat cells I have and the larger they are, the more they contribute to furthering the problem. And this is why when we talked about diet baggage earlier in the conversation a little bit,
right,
why it can get harder and harder over the years to take the same weight off. It's like I'm doing better now than I did the last time, but it still seems like the problem's worse, or I got back to that previous weight faster than I would have in the past. Not only do we have a decline in sex hormone production over time, which then leads to more of the cortisol, the stress hormones, actually furthering the problem too. But then just the fact that those fat cells are metabolically active, like you said, and then that pours more fuel on the fire, right?
Yeah, and this is where it's like, okay, well, how does this work with a fasting lifestyle? Why do we say, 40-40-20? That's our macro split, right? If you're going to go macro, calorie counting, tracking, some of y'all go, nope, I fast so I don't have to do that. Great. Some of y'all like, no, I need to see it to believe it. Great. We're going to meet you where you're at, right? But we recommend, if you don't know what we're talking about, you can head to the show notes, click the Blueprint to Fasting for Fat Loss. It's a free 20-page PDF. In there, we talk about what we recommend in terms of fasting windows and or, the benefits of fasting, and or how to break the fast, and or like, should you go no carb, low carb, keto? Like, what does that look like? Well, the answer is what's sustainable for you. Like, what's the best diet? The one that works for you. What's the best workout plan? The one you'll stick to. What's the best financial strategy? The one you're willing to do, right? Like it's no different here. So when we have insulin and leptin, we need to look at leptin specifically. And that's why we're doing this episode, is because that is going to be where you make the decision to have the second portion, to put the foods on your plate that are going to that keep you on that cycle of, well, is it the cart or the horse? Which came first? Well, it's part of the driving problem, but it's also part of the original issue. And now it's kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy of, well, how do I get off this roller coaster? Well, we need to intercept it with clean fasting windows. And we also need to intercept it with keeping lower carbs, lower refined processed foods in the beginning to help both insulin and leptin aid in this management of the scale going down and you staying motivated,
Yeah.
right? All while you're not just crazy hungry all the time, angry all the time, binging all the time, right? We need to create this balance so we can hit both heads of the problem, which is the insulin and leptin relationship.
Yeah, because if you think about it, the body's almost trying to keep up with insulin levels by producing more leptin. But the problem is, insulin is so much more powerful that it tends to keep control over those scales right there. So even though your leptin levels may be getting higher as insulin levels are high, as you're in fat storage mode, you might see the scale ticking up or having a problem getting it to go lower. That's because they're almost like in a race, but insulin
Right. A race to the
basically,
bottom
yeah,
or a
but
race to the top of the
yeah,
BMI chart,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
which
That's
we
that.
don't. The BMI chart's terrible. Let's
No,
not
I
talk
know,
about
but
it. But you get
that's a
my point,
great visual though. Yeah, they are trying to
right?
race you to the top of the BMI chart. That's a horrible but true analogy. And insulin's always going to win. It's always going to win that race. You can never produce enough leptin to overcome all of the insulin. So when we make those food decisions, when we go to break our fast, and we start to go, okay, how can I get more leptin sensitive? Well, you can do that by controlling your insulin levels, and so we know how to do that better, and so we know the result is going to be better control over leptin levels, because if insulin comes down, leptin
Mm-hmm.
is allowed to come down as well. And so it's very, very important that, like you said earlier, when we go to break our fast, it's not just, oh, just fill my
Yep.
eating window with food and then set my next fasting timer. It's about intentional choices, and the better control I have over prioritizing protein and making sure that I'm not having too many processed carbohydrates, right? And then I
Yep.
go for balance on my plate. I go for whole food choices whenever possible, as much as possible, and in so doing, I'm able to control blood sugar levels, which is then controlling insulin levels and thus controlling leptin levels as well.
If we're going to look at leptin, just big picture, give you some perspective here on what it looks like, then we're going to go into how to leverage fasting to improve your leptin. Just like last episode, we talked about how to improve your insulin sensitivity. We're also going to talk about how to improve your leptin levels or your
Mhm.
satiety hormones, or start to feel satiety or hunger hormones for the first time in a while, right?
Wow, good point. Yep.
Right. So, what does leptin resistance look like? Well, strong appetite, cravings, weight gain, hormone imbalances, infertility issues, fatigue, low thyroid or imbalanced thyroid, other metabolic issues, low level chronic inflammation, right? And here's the weight gain cycle with leptin. Now, I want to say this. Let me say the circle of the life cycle of leptin first, and then I want to make sure I land the plane on the why leptin and insulin in its normal natural levels and normal state is a good thing.
Mhm.
I want to make sure that we're not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Insulin and leptin at their normal levels are needed. They're natural things that we want. It's the
Sure. Yeah.
abnormal, the dysfunctional,
Yeah.
the too
Imbalance.
much for too long that becomes a problem. So the leptin and weight gain cycle, you gain weight. As you gain more fat mass, the number of fat cells increase, as do leptin levels. Leptin resistance, as you increase fat stores, your whole body inflammation, your body develops leptin resistance. You've got a disrupted signal. Even though you have an abundance of stored fat, the signal to your brain gets disrupted. You've got your brain senses low levels of leptin, leading to food cravings and overeating. You've got increased calorie intake. Even though you increase the intake, you're continually hungry, which leads to continued weight gain, right?
Mhm.
In a
Yeah.
natural state, you've got three controllers of food intake: leptin, insulin, and ghrelin, stomach, pancreas, and your fat cells. Okay. So
Mhm.
leptin and we talked about insulin last week. So for now, I'm going to focus on leptin. Leptin has positive effects on different tissues in the body. But when you have leptin resistance, it can decrease your insulin secretion. It can increase your heart rate. It can have effects on your bone mass and regulating your menstrual cycle and regulating your appetite, control of your metabolism, your energy balance. It can activate or underactivate or overactivate your immune system. It can lead to high blood pressure. It can regulate or dysregulate your thyroid hormones. So what we want to talk about is not getting our thermostat up or down, but restoring balance,
Mm. Yeah.
right? So when we look at leptin resistance, well, guess what? How do we restore balance? Well, we want to leverage leptin dynamics with fasting. So
Mhm.
short-term fasting windows, 24 to 72 hours. We want to focus on the refeeding. The when you break your fast, right? Leptin levels come up quickly, which helps regulate your appetite and energy expenditure. And
Mhm.
then ultimately this food component. How do we get dopamine and serotonin and happy hormone hits from things other than food if that's part of the problem?
Yeah, that's true. And whenever you have good, healthy fats on your plate when you go to break your fast, that leptin increase that we're going to get, that's going to quickly rise. That's going to be a really good thing because it helps to accentuate the signal to your body. Hey, fat cells are good. Fat cells are healthy and stored sufficiently. And because we don't want the body to think that, hey, fat cells are in danger somehow, we need to store and create more of them. No, we want
This
the
is the
good
let's
signal.
get the weight off quickly argument, right, Tommy?
Correct. Yeah. Because we hear a lot about that. And, shouldn't I not lose weight too quickly? That's not really something that has a whole lot of backing. There's not a lot of good reasons to kind of make that argument. The better argument in our opinion is that the fat cells are miscommunicating a lot of signals to the body. And so if we can get them to shrink more quickly rather than perpetuating the problem or allowing it to continue for longer and longer periods of time, we're going to get the benefits much, much sooner. Because typically, for most of us, if you have fat to lose, we've typically been storing it for a while. It's usually months to years to decades, not, oh, it's very short term. Like I've never had any excess weight, and then all of a sudden it's been a month or two, and I have some weight to lose here. No, that's not usually how it goes. So usually I've had the negative effects going on for years and years and years, which is what leads to that kind of chronic resistant state for insulin and for leptin and for other hormonal dysregulation with obesity and just being overweight or having any additional fat stores.
Right. So when we talk about fasting and this idea of, nutritional windows and nutritional opportunities, when you fast, leptin levels typically go down. And the short-term fasting window is 24 to 72 hours, which is typically what we coach in our VIP coaching program. We recommend during our challenges. It's in our blueprint to fasting for
Mhm.
fat loss, right? That PDF that you can grab in the show notes. Um, we recommend that because it's backed by what we see in the research. So 16 hours fasting, 8 hours eating. For some, that will move the needle, right? But
Sure.
typically we need to go past that. That's why there's a lot of research on alternate day fasting or modified ADF.
Mm.
Tons of research on that. Or extended fast, rotating through these periodically through the weeks to months, 24 to 72 hours. Um, there's research in the Journal of Metabolism, the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, that this is going to show significant reductions in leptin and improvements in leptin sensitivity, as well as, these, when you break your fast and you eat by putting in, it's going to sound like a broken record if you go Google, go to Dr. Google and look, but focus on nutrient dense foods, including healthy fats. Tommy, you always like to say, what's your favorite protein? And
Mm.
then adding in natural, non refined, non processed, complex carbohydrates from a natural source intermittently throughout your weeks to your meals to make sure we're getting those proper 20% or lower carbohydrates for proper hormone production, for
Mm.
insulin sensitivity, for progesterone production, right? For the menstrual cycle, for testosterone production in men. We want to make sure that we're not completely removing them and we're getting natural sources when we break our fast. So 40-40-20 is what we recommend. But then comes the, well, what does that look like? I don't really have any satiety signals. I can just eat
Mm.
and eat and eat and eat, or then I finish eating and then I'm hungry again. Right. That's the leptin resistant cycle that we're talking about. So
Right.
I want to go into the what can we do to help this stuff that isn't food related, and then also give some food recommendations. And that's why I love your question as we were prepping for this conversation is, well, what's your favorite protein source?
Yeah, it's not a question that I hear asked enough. But if you think about it, if
More
we're
often now than before.
yeah, and
I
and
feel
and
like there's
that's
a shift finally.
yeah, and that's definitely a good thing. But obviously, like protein doesn't happen by accident.
Right.
Protein's expensive. I need to put some time and thought into it. How am I going to prepare? The protein portion of my plate. I'm going to have to plan ahead for it. But if you're thinking to yourself what's your favorite kind of protein, then what that does is it allows you to really look forward to your next plate. Like start asking yourself that question. You can plan for plates to break your fast with that you're going to be looking forward to. Guess what? That makes this fast that much easier when I'm looking forward to what I'm going to have afterwards. It also ensures that insulin and leptin levels are going to be optimal and ideal when I go to break this fast, and help continue with that balancing process rather than sending volatility and higher area under the curve for my glucose, my insulin, and my leptin whenever I go to break this fast. And what we're trying to do here is restore balance in the system that is imbalanced at this point. And what it also does is allows you to bring in dopamine, serotonin, good, happy hormones when you're breaking your fast, but then also allows you to be checking those boxes for things that feel good, allow you to enjoy the process, and don't feel like you're kind of having to white knuckle it through your fast so much, because you're able to enjoy things more, and then looking to fill those buckets as often as possible, food related and non-food related.
And that's what we're going to go into right now. So I love that you just said that, because when we look at, we want this to be like a fun process, right? Mm-hmm. We don't want it to be painful.
Right.
And I'm never going to eat a piece of bread again, or I'm never going to, someday you might not, right? I'm never going to drink again. Yeah. Someday you might not, but right now that might not be the lever you need to pull. Mm. So how do we create balance and sustainability? Because, honestly, there's no one size fits all in terms of an ideal fasting. Well, what's the best fasting time? Well, one that you can stick to, right? Yeah. Now, white knuckling it, you said it, white knuckling it sometimes, yeah, you got to get outside of your comfort zone. You got into this position because of your comfort zone. Sure. So we're not saying that's why we do challenges. Like, we want to challenge you to step outside of that and challenge to push the window. But if you're constantly white knuckling it, we talked about some research inside of our coaching group on one of our Monday meetings, one of our Monday mindset calls, where it was like, discipline or, self-regulation isn't actually a defining characteristic of long-term success when it comes to goals. It's your environment, your skill set, and your knowledge, and how you're going to apply it that actually is going to allow you to have more willpower and discipline over time. So it's not always white knuckling it, but it is sometimes stepping outside and pushing that window, so to speak. So that's why we do the challenges. That's why we have coaching. That's why we have the resources, because, everyone's going to be in a different place mentally, physically. But we want you to be able to, apply these strategies and figure out what's going to work for you. So when Tommy, when you talked about, and you set me up for the last part of this conversation today, is if we're looking at dopamine, right, often called the feel-good neurotransmitter, it's associated with pleasure, motivation, and reward. Then we've got serotonin, which is known as the happiness neurotransmitter, which helps regulate mood, sleep, and appetite. So we typically find a lot of the hungry, angry, lonely, tired, bored, stressed category when we break our fast, or we don't have clean fasting windows, or it becomes a graze session.
Yeah.
Right. Is the nutrition component. How do we boost dopamine and serotonin with food, right? So we can make better decisions to increase our insulin sensitivity when we refeed, right? Because it has been shown that refeeding will help balance the leptin levels. But if you have imbalanced leptin, that's the whole stuck between a rock and a hard place. Well, if it's in balance and I don't have the right signals, so how do I get the right signals? Well, we're going to share that in just a second. And then the other things you can do that are non-food related, exercise, sunshine, sleep, mindfulness, hobbies, supplementation, all of those things, stress response, stress resiliency, those are all also other things you can leverage, you can pull to boost dopamine and serotonin, but specifically for this insulin leptin relationship, this leptin resistance, this how do we stimulate leptin sensitivity when we break our fast. The number one dopamine boosting food is protein, specifically foods rich in tyrosine, chicken, turkey, fish, dairy products. Tyrosine is needed for the building blocks of dopamine. Then we've got bananas. Ripe bananas are high in tyrosine. Somebody go, it's got sugar in it. Okay, well, how many people do you know that got diabetes and got 50 pounds overweight by eating too many bananas?
Right. Yeah.
That's bananas.
That wasn't the cause.
That's not the problem. Let's just be real.
Cause, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Dad joke 101. Right. And then you've got nuts and seeds, which is what we recommend most people to break their fast with. A handful of almonds, walnuts, pumpkin seeds. This Nevermind has things that will help stem the possible digestive changes that you might feel if you're new to fasting or if you're doing extended fast for the first time. But nuts and seeds. So also bone broths have a lot of high protein content, a lot of gut healing properties. So those are dopamine boosting foods. And then serotonin is, oh my God, am I going to say it? Complex carbohydrates. Because of tryptophan, which helps the serotonin production in the brain. And, oh yeah, fruits and vegetables, pineapples, bananas, kiwis. These are all hormone building foods, right? Well, I can't eat fruit. I got diabetes. Okay, again, like moderation, but putting some of these things into when you break your fast. And then fermented foods, kefir, yogurt, sauerkraut, gut health, all also produce serotonin. So when we break our fast with this level of intentionality, protein first, right? Which is why I loved your question. You're going to be able to break this cycle and also leverage the biggest bang for your buck with your fasting and your food choice efforts when you're cycling through your fasting windows on a day-to-day basis.
I love that. And as you're cycling through those windows, it makes it that much easier to get into your next fast and to close that window when you were in control of the intention behind the last meal too. Because as that meal goes on to a graze, the problem is, let me tie it back to earlier in the conversation, glycogen stores start to get fuller and fuller and fuller. And then all of a sudden, if that fuel is getting spilled over into the long-term fat storage bucket, guess what? That's going to kick up the cravings that are going to hit 4 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours after I set that next fasting timer. And those are the ones that when I'm up against those hungry, angry, lonely, tired, bored, stressed moments are that much easier to go, yeah, you know what? I did set the fasting timer, but maybe I'm not going to stick to it this time. This one's a little too hard, or this one feels like I'm going to need to white knuckle it. Well, I'm going to say, let's white knuckle through that feeling if I had an indulgent last meal or if that window, stayed open too long. But at the same time, let me plan to do it a little bit better next time, a little differently for the next meal so that I can make it a little bit more enjoyable, easier, intuitive to jump into that next fast and then continue my momentum.
So we talked a lot of things today, right? So as we promise in our, I think, very catchy opening to our podcast, I love our podcast music. I listen to it without words often, just on
jamming.
repeat. Just jamming out. But we always say actionable, science of lifestyle design, right? So no one size fits all here, but we want to specifically target optimizing leptin levels. Well, we've got fasting and feeding, right? So intermittent fasting windows, fast cycling, the stuff we teach in the challenges, the way to fluctuate what Tommy was just talking about, in and out of them more seamlessly. We're not talking perfection. We're talking 80% of the time, right? You can flip the switch properly. You can make a good decision. You feel good about it, right? So if we're going to wrap up today, Tommy, with an action step, here's what I'm going to throw at you and see if you want to embellish it or just accept it, and we'll be done for the day. So start with manageable fasting periods for you that are just outside of your comfort zone.
I like it.
Gradually incorporate longer or more intense fasting strategies because this is going to improve overall metabolic health and leptin function in the long term. Then put some thought into how you're breaking your fast. Are you leveraging your dopamine boosting foods and your serotonin boosting foods and your leptin sensitivity when you break your fast? Or are you just giving up all the hard work that you just did? So summarize what I was just trying to say today in terms of the food, because fasting, it's start with manageable fasting periods, gradually incorporate longer or more intense fasting strategies, and then focus on the decisions of what's going on your plate.
Yeah. And when it comes to your actual plate, then shoot for that 40-40-20. Shoot for the balance of whole foods that you were able to control most of the ingredients most of the time as much as you can. And when you do that, you're going to support your fasting efforts, and you're also going to support movement with the scale and quality of life, energy levels that are going to go along with your fasting and your food related decisions. So I'm going to encourage everybody, don't try to change everything just all at once, because it's hard to make things really stick when you do it like that. So take a look at your next plate and make one or two better decisions about it. Increase the protein a little bit, maybe decrease the carbohydrates, or especially the processed carbohydrates, or put them in a little bit of the back burner. because as you prioritize your protein, have that portion first, then blood sugar and insulin levels are more already set for the meal, rather than when you lead up to the meal with, let's say, naked carbs, like carbohydrates that are basically just kind of by themselves or as part of an appetizer or something like that. So set the blood sugar and insulin stage beforehand going into that meal, and that's gonna set you up for success with that meal too.
And if you're going, what the heck's 40-40-20? Where do I start? Shameless plug. Head to the show notes. Click the link for the Blueprint to Fasting for Fat Loss. We'll send it to your email. It's 20-page PDF. It's got a little bit of the science behind it, the why, the what, the who, the when, the where. It's got some fasting schedules, the 40-40-20 split. It's by far our most downloaded free resource that we have. You can head to our website, thefastingforlife.com. We've got insulin assessments and other resources for you there as well. But ultimately, today's episode is all about that sustainability piece, right? So make one decision in terms of your fasting window, one decision in terms of your food choices. Know that you are taking care of the cart and the horse, or the chicken and the egg, or the rock and the hard place, or whatever analogy you want to put in there. And it's going to create sustainability long-term. So be confident in your action. Pick one of those or two of those things that we talked about today. Go put it into your fasting lifestyle. Tommy, as always, appreciate the conversation, sir, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you. Bye.
So, you've heard today's episode, and you may be wondering, where do I start? Head on over to thefastingforlife.com and sign up for our newsletter, where you'll receive fasting tips and strategies to maximize results and fit fasting into your day-to-day life.
While you're there, download your free Fast Start guide to get started today. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Fasting for Life.